Good afternoon, and thanks a lot for being here and for warm applause also. The talk I'm delivering today is based on a paper, on an article that is now under revision in the journal Problems of Post-Communism. But since I know that the audience here is mixed and you all have different level of knowledge about Ukraine and LGBT movement and right-wing groups there, I tried to adjust it and to make it more like speaking to wider audience and maybe not to bore you much with theoretical parts of it. Here is the overview of the talk. I will give you a bit of background, so I will explain you why LGBTI rights, why political debate, how these two are connected, what is Gayropa, then just a couple of words about the theoretical framework I'm working with, and then I will talk mostly about Ukraine in the aftermath and before Euromaidan, and about the implications that the instrumentalization of the topic of LGBT rights has for LGBT community in Ukraine, positive as well as negative ones. So there is the issue of LGBTI rights recently became very salient, very well pronounced in Ukrainian public sphere, and not to be subjective, because I worked also as an LGBTI activist, and of course when I go through media, my eye first of all catches whatever mention is there about of LGBT rights or homosexuality or gender. I did some quantitative research or content research, and here's on this table you can see the number of mentioning of the words like gay, lesbian, less in the beginning of the abbreviation LGBT, and all related issues in Ukrainian most popular media sources. And as you can see here, okay, that doesn't work very well. So as you can see, until 2009-2010, there was almost nothing on this topic said or mentioned. And if there was an article, it was something about Elton John or about some scandal in Russian show business. And then starting from 2011, you can see this slow increase in this mentioning, with the peak first in 2013, then slow decrease in 2014, and then again it's growing. And if you see this decline in 2017, it's only because I took first half of 2017, so actually, in fact, the number is still growing. So, and another thing...
What has caused the dip in 2014?
Well, wait for it. Another thing I want to say about those mentionings is that if in the beginning you could see more articles with words homosexualism, which is actually not correct, so it's homosexualism, which is not a correct term, it should be homosexuality, and like gay, lesbian. So in later articles you see abbreviation LGBT, LGBTI even, LGBTQ, so much better informed and much better much more politically correct, if you want, way in which media speaks about those issues. So the questions are, of course, then when I saw the numbers, and I was like, yeah, okay, indeed, now this topic is much more discussed. The question is how it happened, what caused it increase, then decrease, and then what are the effects of this? Are there any effects for LGBTI people in Ukraine now that they're so popular and they are so much discussed and invited for interviews, for talk shows, and for political programs as well, high-quality political programs? So, going back to 2011, 2012, that was a year when Ukraine was in a situation when our government was trying to sit basically on two chairs. So on the one hand, our then president Viktor Yanukovych was negotiating with the European Union the association agreement, the free trade agreement, which would bring definite advantages for Ukrainian economy. On the other hand, this government was pretty much corrupt and very much pro-Russian. So there was this pressure coming from President Putin and his government pushing Ukraine to enter the customs union, which would, of course, exclude then the possibility of signing an association agreement with the European Union and put Ukraine in more dependent relations with Russia as well, and put it in the customs union with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and now also Armenia. While our government was trying to manipulate the situation somehow, not very well, in Russia in 2011, the first local law, municipal law, was adopted on banning propaganda of homosexuality. So it was framed something like banning propaganda of homosexuality to protect rights of minors. In Ukraine and in many other countries, the very similar tendency started, and especially after 2012, when this law in Russia became national or federal. So here you can see the pictures of some meetings or protests in Ukraine, pushing Ukrainian government to adopt the same law. And actually in 2012-2013, we had 6 draft laws submitted to Ukrainian parliament, Verkhovna Rada, in different ways, basically proposing the same, to ban propaganda of homosexuality. But if in Russia this is usually punished with administrative, with some fines, then some of the draft laws in Ukraine were actually proposing arrests, like up to 5 years of imprisonment. And furthermore, so luckily none of these laws was passed further than first reading, and but still there are similar initiatives until today. Then in 2013, okay, so that's the picture on the right. There was a large info campaign. So this large info campaign, it was sponsored by Ukrainian pro-Russian group called Ukrainian Choice. It still exists. The head of it is Viktor Medvedchuk, who is his son is godson of Putin, so they're in a pretty close relationship. And the whole campaign was aimed to tell Ukrainians how dangerous it is for them to enter the European Union, to sign association with the European Union. One of the most amazing, to my mind, posters was that one which tells association with the EU means same-sex marriages. So you can see those guys and girls schematically shown holding hands. And so these posters were on the major streets of big cities of Ukraine, and there were also some campaigns explaining how the EU is trying to impose homosexuality on Ukrainians, how Ukraine will be coercively homosexualized. In 2013, in November, the association agreement was supposed to be signed in Vilnius, and just several days before, our then President Yanukovych said that the government is refusing to do so, that there are some preparations needed, and so on and so that. But shortly after, our Prime Minister, then Mykola Azarov, actually declared publicly that the reason why the association agreement couldn't be signed is because the EU is trying to make Ukraine legalize same-sex marriages. And since Ukrainian people are not ready to do that, to accept that, the association agreement cannot be signed. And immediately after that, then the ambassador of the EU to Ukraine, Jan Tombinsky, made official declaration that it was not true, that the EU never wanted to do so, that there was no even such a topic discussed, but the first who said was heard better. And as you might know, then several days after the association agreement hadn't been signed, peaceful protests started in the center of Kiev on the main square, which is called Independence Square, or Maidan Nezalezhnosti, or Maidan. And these were first very small protests, mostly young people with flags of the European Union, who basically wanted to express their wish to that their country joins the European Union rather than follows the ties with Russia. But on the night of this November 30th, these young people were beaten up by state police, state security forces, and once the news about this made it to media and social media, the next day already the whole square and the neighboring streets were crowded with people who came to protest. And for me it would be important to stress that these people were pretty much not protesting against or for the association agreement with the EU, but rather against the government and the way how the government was corrupt and how it disrespected people and violated human rights. It was a very big mobilization of people, both in Kiev and other major and smaller cities in Ukraine. And of course, most of people who somehow belong to grassroots civil society organizations or to institutionalized social movements, they were all there. And the same applies to LGBT activists in Kiev. However, because of this, relations or this association created artificially by certain mostly pro-Russian groups, there was a decision, unanimous among LGBT activists in Kiev, that they will not act as active as LGBT people in those protest camps. So on Maidan, the protest camp was created with tents, and people were there in shifts, somebody stayed there the whole week, somebody came only after work. And for LGBT people, it was very important not to come there with rainbow flags, not to self-identify there as queer or homosexual, not to let the provocation take place. You can see this picture with weird people with rainbow flags, Ukrainian flag, and the EU flag on the background. And you might not see it right here, but this is very close to a protest camp. So what happened, because it was impossible to identify real LGBT people in protest camp, and still there was a need to show that there is Europe, they are trying to homosexualize Ukrainians. A fake gay parade was arranged, so these people, they're students of a theater college in Kiev who were hired and paid for wearing this, bringing these flags and making a dance in front of the protest camp saying that they're LGBT people who came to support association agreements with the European Union. And after that, they also paid for making a big press conference at the Ukrainian Information Agency, where they made an official claim or statement of LGBT community, that LGBT community of Ukraine supports association agreement with the EU and wants to be with their people. Well, luckily, in Ukraine, I think almost nobody bought this, because almost immediately, like people were almost immediately talking about provocation. Also, it looked pretty fake. But it went quite viral in certain Russian media and was used by trolls for making memes and everything, and saying that Ukraine goes to Gayropa, which is a word made out of Europe, Gayropa and gay. So basically here is how I'm trying to answer the first of my question, how I'm trying to answer the question why gays or why LGBT people are those who are in the center of all this debate about European integration, and why this is the main argument which is often used when there is a discussion whether the EU and Ukraine should be getting closer or not. And I'm trying to answer it using the morality politics approach. And to put it briefly, morality politics scholars, they say the morality politics issue is an issue which prioritizes certain moral values, or so to say universal values, over others, over real policy claims or real politics. And the reason why morality politics gets to people is because everybody considers him or herself an expert of the issue. So while not everybody can, argue something on taxation or, some social welfare, though some people try, everybody knows everything about death penalty, about divorce, about what should be defined as marriage, and who should be allowed to adopt, and what should be the rights for people who identify themselves as homosexuals. And then the other part that morality politics scholars argue is that this morality politics issue can become really salient in the case when it can be well fit or well integrated into already existing political conflict. And this is how it happened in Ukraine. So there was already pretty much ignored for some reason by some EU officials, for example, and especially those trying to promote LGBT rights in Ukraine. There was this conflict around Ukrainian foreign policy identity, whether Ukraine should go west or east or be independent, which is the least popular opinion. And then the issue of homosexuality somehow very nicely fit into that debate. But what were the implications of that? When the Euromaidan protests finished, and took 8 months for the protest camp to be there, and our government, our president fled to the US, to Russia in February 2014. Then it took some time for interim government to start working, and then we had new president in spring, Petro Poroshenko, who is our president now. So LGBT community was very optimistic. They expected new pro-European government, be also much more tolerant and do some steps to, to promote anti-discrimination laws and to, to allow equality marches in Kiev and so on. However, in 2014, our government representatives, the Kiev mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, former boxer, they said that it wasn't a good time for Pride parade on Krещатик because we have political crisis, because war started and so on, so that. And so there was this certain sentiment of disillusion, and the explanation, for example, for the decrease in 2014 that you mentioned is exactly here. So many journalists actually were afraid to write even about LGBT issues because there was this whole sentiment that Russia uses, whenever a Ukrainian says something positive about homosexuality or homosexual, this is immediately proving the fact that indeed the EU, imposed on us this pervert values, pervert ideas. But then things started slowly to improve. By 2015, you could see again there was this growth of the articles. Why so? One of the reasons is that the EU redirected, rechanneled sources, and our civil society organizations got much more support and funding, both financial but also technical, educational. So we had, for example, a lot of trainings for journalists being taught how to write about such issues. And this is where the well-informed texts are coming from. And for now, I would say media is one of the biggest supporters of LGBT movement. And then the EU also had some carrot to give to Ukraine, which our government really wanted. And there were two carrots. One was association agreement to be signed, and the other one was visa-free regime. And of course, Ukrainian government really wanted this visa-free regime to give to the population to show that, until now we have this president elections, and the fact that Poroshenko got for us visa-free regime is a big thing. They remind us about this all the time. But there was this stumbling block for LGBT rights, for example. So the European Union wanted us to adopt certain laws in accordance with the European legislation that would protect vulnerable groups. And one of those was labor code. So you might know that, in fact, in the European Union, where, of course, LGBT people enjoy their human rights much better than in Ukraine, still the only supranational law, or like the law that works for all the member states and that protects LGBT people, is actually the Employment Convention. Because as for all the other points, there is still not a universal anti-discrimination law in the European Union protecting LGBT people. So the EU cannot demand this from Ukraine because of this. But there is this employment directive, not convention. So to fulfill this, Ukraine had to adopt a clause in the labor code that would protect LGBTI people during the employment. And it was sad and anecdotal, so we had one day when Ukrainian parliament had to vote for that, and they voted 6 times. And this is actually illegal, so you cannot vote 6 times during one day. But what happened was that they voted against. Then the prime minister, and this came up in my interviews, he was calling the leaders of the blocs to his cabinet, and he was like, you know what? Our people now are in Brussels, they're fighting for this visa-free regime, and we need visa-free regime, so you go there and you make your people vote for. They go out, they vote again, and again they don't get majority of votes. So yeah, after 6 times, they managed to get that majority, 250 something votes out of 263, I think, out of 450. And but right after that, sadly, Yuri Lutsenko, he is the leader of our president's political bloc. He said, and he assured everybody that, yeah, we signed it, we approved it, but don't worry, we will never let same-sex marriages. And he said this notorious phrase, it is better to have a gay parade in Kiev than Russian tanks on Khreshchatyk. So this was, this basically this thought that we all had. You choose either this tolerant Europe, and this is pretty much rhetoric very often in Ukraine, that, yeah, of course, if we have to go to Europe, we shouldn't call black people bad words, we should be tolerant towards gays, even if we don't like it, but because these are European values. And then, of course, again, Russian media presented it interestingly, showing that Ukrainians were told about advantages of gay parades over Russian tanks. So what do we have by early 2019? If we look at Ukraine from the point of, from the perspective of the LGBTI rights, so we have our rating or ranking in ILGA Europe, International Lesbian and Gay Association in Europe, improved significantly. And this is mostly because of 2 facts. This is because of these legal things, this adoption of this amendment to labor code. And the other thing is we have so-called National Strategy for Human Rights 2020, which is only on the paper, but it still counts for Gayropa, because there is a project to create a draft law about same-sex partnership. I don't believe it will be on the table by 2020, but because of this, we have improved our ranking. At the same time, country remains, and yeah, we don't have any law, of course, criminalizing homosexuality or anything like this. So, for example, if a Ukrainian person wants to apply for asylum being an LGBT in Europe, it is highly unlikely that he or she will get it. It is still much better in the US, but for the EU, Ukraine is considered a safe environment. At the same time, we have a very high level of homo and transphobic violence. There was no single case after the law was adopted that any LGBT person went to court and tried to sue their employer for discrimination, even though we have now human rights defenders and advocates saying that if somebody is willing to do that, they will do all the work for free and they're prepared, but people are afraid. And this is almost impossible to prove a hate crime, that like if a person is being beaten and they go to police and they want to frame it as a homophobic crime, it is almost impossible to do so. But I wanted also to talk about two other implications that I see as coming out or deriving from this fuss about like all this talk about LGBT rights in media. And one of them is this rise of right-wing groups in Ukraine. Important thing to say, and I would like to stress it, that the talks about fascism and rise of right-wing groups in Western media are somewhat exaggerated, in the sense that we don't have any radical right party in the parliament, and never had, unlike some other Eastern European countries. However, we do have some very vocal right-wing groups who are also very aggressive. And these groups are mostly paid, they're funded by someone that can be seen from the way how they dress, so they often have branded like flags, jackets, and these masks they put on their faces, and seeing the level of people who are there, it's highly likely that they paid with their own money for that, The thing is that during Euromaidan, there were moments where the state was quite like, there was these moments of aggression, and state security forces attacked the protest camp. And that was then when right-wing groups were the most prepared to fight back, because they were well trained and some of them actually had weapons. So this is how, and they also they created these militarized structures within the protest camps, which they associated with Zaporizhzhia Sich. There was this place where Ukrainian Cossacks lived. And so due to that, they gained certain legitimacy they didn't enjoy before. So after Euromaidan, right-wing groups became like a symbol of, protectors, fighters in Ukrainian independence, even though maybe sometimes doing it like going a bit extreme. So we have now political, and then we have now three groups. We have political right-wing groups. They're trying to gain some chairs in the parliament. We have right-wing groups in the war zone. And we have right-wing groups which are basically just aggressors trying to attack. And these three groups are somehow they're linked together but not closely associated. So this would be a topic for another interesting research for someone. I'm sure somebody's already doing this. So there are those groups that are attacking all LGBT-related events or gender-related events. And now, as presidential elections are coming, they also now are attacking Roma people, because apparently there are not enough LGBT events for them, and they really want, to make it loud. And this is crazy. They come with video cameras, so it's not just, to come and beat someone. No, it's to make a statement. So they come, they make a video. They're always or often a journalist with them, because so they mostly are wearing masks. But journalist would be usually a woman who will talk about traditional values and how they are protecting the country against this. And one of the arguments of these people against LGBT, apart from the fact that this is all perversion, of course, is that they say, well, there is war in the country, and those people should be at war. They should be, you should send them to war zone. Now, just for a second, I will show you. So, here is the map of Ukraine, and the red zone is the zone where the war is taking place. And this is just to illustrate how, so on the one hand, Ukraine is 600,000 square meters, so it's pretty small part of it. And we were just talking with Mila over coffee that people who live in all the other parts, like we know that we have war, but this is something that goes as a background. So you see people wearing uniform in the city sometimes. Somebody dies from time to time and you see it on social media if it's not somebody you know personally. And then now people tend to, donate money to volunteers or to soldiers or to hospitals. But at the same time, but you live your normal life, you go to the university or go to work or you go to nightclubs. But whenever something happens, war is there to be an argument to justify something. I don't know, delay with paying your pension, so we have war now. Oh, increasing gas prices, we have war. LGBT rights march, oh no, we shouldn't do that, we have war. So this is not surprising, therefore, that also LGBT community developed their own response or narrative as a reaction to that. And I call it as Ukrainian homo-patriotism. So what happened that, during the last 2 years, we started having a series of coming outs or a series of interviews of people who happen to be LGBT, but who also are in war zone, and they're working there as soldiers. And here was the first interview, the one in the center. It says, I'm gay, I was in ATO, so this is the abbreviation for War Conflict Zone as Anti-Terrorist Operation. I saw death, and I'm a patriot of my country. And then there were a series of different other interviews, both anonymous and open. And then in the end, there was a whole exhibition with pictures of gay, mostly male gay, but also lesbian and trans soldiers, camouflaged, in 90% of cases not showing their faces. But the message was that they were wearing uniform, camouflage, and they were either coming from ATO or the pictures were taken there. The problem, though, is that what's been happening last 2 years, and especially last year, is that we have this normalization rhetoric, which is empowering in part, because this is the creation of this, new, good, gay Ukrainian citizen who is masculine, is brave, who is patriot necessarily, better speaking Ukrainian, and who is not afraid to fight. The problem I see with that is that Ukrainian LGBT community is not very, really inclusive and not really, homogeneous. So by this, they kind of reinforce marginalization and exclusion of those who do not conform to this image. And while we have many LGBT people who are not masculine, who don't want to fight, but we also have a lot of heterosexuals who don't want to go to war, Like half of my friends, they hide, they don't live in their flats because they go to their dacha, summer cottage, because they're afraid to be drafted. So, but they are not blamed for that, but if you happen to be a gay and you want to go to war, that's a big problem. Or if you happen to be a trans man and you don't want to go to war for obvious reasons, it's again like you will be blamed. To conclude with some remarks and to move to the discussion. So first of all, what would be my takeaway for you for that is that it is very important that when we talk about topic of LGBT rights in Ukrainian public sphere and political debate, it's very important, and especially for a researcher or for an international organization, especially for those who want to promote LGBT rights in Ukraine, don't to see that, because and this is my concern, and this is part of what I'm arguing in my dissertation, and now hopefully soon to be a book, is that it shouldn't be considered in the vacuum. It should be put in this wider picture, and the domestic actors are often much more important than some international ones. Yeah, Russian influence is important, but we have many political parties that own media space, and they dictate what is to be shown on this media, and this is what gives people understanding of what Europe is, what values Europe is bringing to them. Another thing is that, again, conceptualization and measurement of success or progress or improvement for LGBTI people in Ukraine also should be much better contextualized, and the different dimensions of it should be looked at, because now I personally am not very happy with growing ranking and definition of Ukraine as a safe haven for LGBT people, like Russian gays or gays from Chechnya now can move to Ukraine and live better life. Well, no, it's not true, and especially if they're Chechen. This, their intersectionality, ethnicity, religion, they should be taken in consideration. And finally, again, one shouldn't be that optimistic when they talk about mobilization and institutionalization of LGBTI movement, because on the one hand, it becomes more developed, we have organizations, we have project culture, we have a lot of reports to write now, and at the same time, all these organizations, they become more, they become further from grassroots. They sometimes take in consideration more what the donor organizations want from them than what is there on the ground. And finally, sometimes they prioritize one group, like now this good gay Ukrainian citizen, over the majority, because of strategic interest, because of because of right-wing groups who are influencing actually their activities. But this positive development should still be looked at critically. On this, thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer questions.